absolutely. Okay, hi everybody. If you're coming, two things I better start before we start here. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, we're not live with you, but hi. And for those of you, we'll catch up with you on we'll give Facebook a minute or two to let everybody know that we're here, but hold that book up again because Molly, you heard it was Rachel, you were saying that you saw that it was a Beauty and the Beast and you were like, give me this book now. And then you mentioned it in one of the things that we've been doing. And it's like, Julie, you need to get this. Oh my God. So it's like immediately I was like, how do I get a hold of like who in Harper do I know that I could get?
And this? It was like before, I think I had just read a PDF, Molly, and I was doing one of these interviews. It was like, Julie, Marvelous by Molly Greeley. Now. And it's one of those now books.
It was a now book. I was telling Molly I was telling Rachel in the green room, my sister and I have similar reading tastes. I mean, we read a little different things. And she was like, Joel, I devoured this. It is just so everybody now just get this
just book now. Even my I have some picky reader friends who don't start and finish every book. But one of my pickiest reader friends, I have to be brave if I'm going to recommend something. I recommended this. She rationed it out by chapter to make it last longer. So
that is like the best thing that you can possibly hear as a writer, I feel like.
Honestly. All right, let's get the show on the road so we can hear about this wonderful book. And I'm going to be sitting in the background and I know I have tons of questions. So hello, everybody. I'm Julie with Warwick's. We're located in San Diego, La Jolla, just a little bit north of San Diego. We were just saying, Rachel and I, we've been doing these virtual events. My goodness, we're in years
2020 now. It's been 2 years and many different genres and people and so much fun.
Wonderful. So Rachel, so most people will recognize you, Rachel, but you're calling in from
Toronto, Canada.
Toronto. Yay. And Molly, you're calling in from
Traverse City, Michigan.
Michigan. Okay. So we usually on these things, we have people joining us from East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country.
We had Maggie from London when she called it at 1 a.m.
At 1 a.m. Do you remember that? And we definitely were not thinking when we booked that one.
We were not thinking.
I felt so bad. It was like midnight was rolling in and it was like, oh my God.
She was so smart at 1 a.m. It's amazing.
It was crazy. So hopefully we have people joining us from all over today. And like I said earlier, if you're watching it on YouTube, we're not live with you, but stay with us. It's going to be a great conversation. If you are in the San Diego area, we would love to see you. Come by the store and pick up your copy of Marvelous. But we also, what I'm going to be doing with you on Facebook is I'm going to be chatting with you in the comment section. So I'll put a link in there on how to order the book. Also in that comment section is where we would love to have some questions from you. That's always a fun part of the conversation. So don't be shy and put a question in there for Molly or Rachel. Both of them will answer questions for you. So with that, I'm going to introduce these wonderful authors and go away for a little while. So Molly Greeley earned her bachelor's degree in English with a creative writing emphasis from Michigan State University, where my daughter-in-law actually went as well. So she's from Michigan too, where she was the recipient of the Louis B. Sadler Prize. I always get that mixed up. Sadler Prize in the arts.
It just depends on what language you're speaking in. It's
language, right? It's like, oh my goodness. But she was a recipient of the Sadler Prize in Arts for Creative Writing. As mentioned, she's here today to talk to us about Marvelous, which I believe is your third book. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
Yeah, okay. And joining her is Rachel McMillan, our favorite here, interviewer and author. Rachel is the author of the Herringford and Watts Mysteries, the Van Buren and DeLuca Mysteries, the 3/4 Time series of contemporary Viennese romances, and most recently, the Mozart Code. And I know she's working on some great collaborations and other standalone books as well. So hopefully we'll hear a little bit about some of those later too. She's also the author of Dream Plan Go, a travel guide to inspire independent adventure, which if you follow her on Twitter, she practices what she preaches on that. So she goes to some pretty cool places. So ladies, have a great conversation. We'll see you in about a half hour or so.
Thanks so much, Julie. And thank you, Molly. Everybody, I tend to be a bit of a rabid book gusher, And that means that my entire life is devouring stories. And my favorite thing in the entire world is finding books that just make me want to burst. And so I had read The Clergyman's Wife and The Heiress by Molly, and I was like, wow, she's smart. And she had done something with Jane Austen's novels where she extolled different characters that probably weren't always front and center. But when I found out that she was doing the story that inspired the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale, I thought, well, this is my catnip. So I begged Molly for an early copy, which she was delighted and so kind to give to me. And I absolutely gobbled it up, stayed up till 4 a.m. on my first read. I have read it since multiple times, once so that I could review it for Austen Prose. If you don't follow Austen Prose and you want some really good book recommendations, I absolutely recommend that website. So Molly, I want to start by asking you, how did you stumble into this story?
So that was a very just serendipitous thing. I was doing edits for The Heiress and I was on a deadline, and this was like just a couple of weeks in early 2020, just a couple of weeks before everything shut down. And I was sitting in a cafe with a friend, and I Googled, I honestly am not even sure what I Googled. It was just some stray fact that I needed to know about the time period that I was writing and to make sure I'd gotten that right. And somehow there was something about this couple and this, kind of clickbaity website that said, promised to tell me the true story behind Beauty and the Beast. And Beauty and the Beast has always been a story that's fascinated me. And so I clicked and ended up falling down this rabbit hole of like a couple of hours of just frantically Googling to see if this was true, trying to find out more about this couple. And I like emerged from that. And I remember turning to my friend and just saying, I think I found the topic for my next book. And then of course I was frantically Googling to make sure no one else had already written this because it seemed unbelievable.
I hate that moment. I hate that
Yes.
moment when you're like, has someone done, how has someone not done this? Someone's done this, but
I couldn't believe that no one had done it. It was, it's such an interesting story. But yeah.
I love your rabbit holes. Can you talk a little bit about, and readers, once you read this 17 times, which you will after you get it, because you're not going to get enough out of it the first time, you're going to be insatiable for more. You're going to start thinking more and more about the title and the many different connotations that the title has. How did the title come about?
I tend not to be very great with titles.
Well, publishers change them anyways. So
they do. Yeah. Marvelous, I had probably 6 different working titles while I was drafting it, and they all just felt very clunky. And then I kept within the book, the people, the main character, Pedro, keeps being referred to as a Marvel, and I ended up just writing out Marvelous one day on my 100th draft of this, and it just felt right. And this was actually possibly, I think this was the first time that a publisher actually kept the title.
I love that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we need to remember about this book, and when you read it and how absolutely astonishingly beautiful it is that you were writing this during lockdown when your young children were at home. I personally had trouble writing a book just by myself, not having to take care of anything but the plants that I killed. How did you possibly do that? Like, it's incredible that you did that.
Thank you. I don't know. It feels kind of like a fever dream looking back on it. It was a lot of, because it was in the beginning, we didn't obviously know how long this was going to last. So I was kind of deep in research at that point once I finished the Heiress's edits. And I just decided it was kind of like an escape. It was, going into France and Italy and these places, and, the Canary Islands and these places where this couple lived, and trying to figure out as much as I could about the background of the story. And then when I realized it was time to start drafting. There was, research was, there was nothing more to research. I started locking myself in the guest room while my youngest, who at that point was, how old would he have been? 2.5. He was napping. And so, and the older two, were doing virtual school first, that at the end of 2020, and then we ended up doing homeschool. And so, but during virtual school, they didn't really have much in the afternoon, so I was able to kind of let them play beyond outside the door outside the guest room door, while I tried to just sit there and write. And
Wow.
I honestly think a lot of it was just the escape. It was like I didn't have to think about the state of the world at that point. I could escape into the state of the world in the past, which is not always a great place, but at least it wasn't where we were right then. So,
And there is a permeance and illustrative knowledge of cloistered settings and bondage and entrapment, not bondage in a dirty way, people, but bondage is in and I have to tell you, I do not know, I've never said Pedro's other name aloud before. Is it
Petrus.
Petrus? Okay.
However, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I'm going to. I didn't know how to pronounce it for
Well,
the entire time I was drafting the book. I called him Petrus in my head.
I called him Petrus in my head too.
And I think there was a video that I found somewhere where someone had, put together this story, like the background of this story, and, just unbelievable history or something. And they called him Petrus. So it didn't even occur to me to look up how to pronounce his name. And then the audiobook narrator, who is amazing, she actually sent a note to the editor and was like, this is not the right way to pronounce this. And thank God
bless her.
she knew.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. So yeah, it's embarrassing, but true. I had no idea how to pronounce my character's name.
But who says it aloud? And one of the things that's so interesting about this is Petrus and Catherine go from one prison in which they have very little agency over their lives to another, and even in moments, and I don't want to spoil anything, where they think that they found this kind of mecca or haven, where they are finally going to be able to raise their family and be different, but still not have the fact that they're owned by the court and their moves and their children and everything is owned. They keep stumbling upon other prisons. And so it sucked to write during the pandemic. Every author will say that. The fact that Danielle Steele had trouble writing made me feel better about life.
Yes, I heard that too. Yes.
That whole sense of suffocation in pursuit of just wanting to live your life as a dignified human really comes through. And I wanted to quote I underlined most of this book, and in my Instagram stories at one point it was just basically the marvelous show forever. I actually had people say, Rachel, like, can you post something else in your Instagram stories? I'm like, no, out of context quotes forever. But one of them, Catherine says about her newborn daughter who suffers from her father's condition. This is a Beauty and the Beast story, and Pedro, also known as Petrus, suffers from being covered with hair. There is a very medical term for it that I didn't also learn how to pronounce. But
that one I do
yes.
know.
You knew it was going to come up at some point. But she looks at her daughter and she thinks she's too strange to be true, too perfect to be real. And that to me just is the juxtaposition about the brutality and horror that this book presents in terms of this wolfman, beast-like human who's seen as an other, but also his eventual wife, who only serves as a prop to be sold because women had no agency. And when her father, a merchant, loses everything, she doesn't have any more decisions than this man who is deemed something that is bestial. And that is astounding to me. And the fact that you were able to mine both the beauty and the horror at the same time is part of why this book is, when I think about the term marvelous, I think about this astounding awe. I mean, it's not just radical Marvy, that's Marvy. No, it is just, you don't know whether to be entranced by how gorgeous it is. And you do, oh, Molly, you're so smart. You do this amazing thing that the darker the book gets, the more poetic the imagery is. And that is just Writers 101. Everybody, let's do a writer's craft class just on this. You had mentioned you did a lot of the research before you got into the writing of the story, and that you fell down your internet rabbit holes where you got clickbait, where it was like, yay, lots of this stuff. Oh, and then those horrible ads show up and it's like, no, I didn't Google Viagra, but that's what happens on rabbit holes. I'm assuming that there's a lot of information about these two that was not available, that you had to fill in the blanks for. At what point did you have to let the research go and let your imagination step in?
To be honest, I had a hard time with that at first because, when I wrote my other two books, they were based on Jane Austen characters, which, felt audacious in a way to take someone else's words or someone else's character and make her my own. But I got almost paralyzed by the idea of taking a real person's life and trying to fictionalize it. And it took me a while to get to the point where I was able to say, okay, this is fiction. I'll be as close to what the research says as I can, but it's fiction. And once I did that, it was so much more fun, first of all, but it was also, I guess, in a way, a gift that there was so little about them, because, with Pedro, there was one man who's written a biography about him, and I was able to kind of mine that and a lot of that was even the biographer's assumptions, that he made. But I kind of decided to take them as gospel because they made sense to me. But Catherine, his wife, there is nothing about her. All we know is that she was younger than he was. We know probably what she looked like because there's a portrait of her, and we know that her father was a merchant, and that's it. So she was kind of, it was really fun to try to take her and make her into sort of the beauty character, figure out how to make the fairy tale tie in with the actual historical fiction. So that's where, in the book, she has a mother who is Italian. She has, who was obsessed with her own appearance. And all of that was completely made up, but it felt like a way of bringing, I guess, the idea of appearance as kind of a cage into Catherine's life as well, that she was someone who was trapped by these beauty rituals, by this idea that she could be sold because she was beautiful and desirable, and just as her husband was bought and sold because he was an unusual looking person. And so I think, taking the historical facts are a great jumping off point, but it's so fun to be able to, especially when you've got a fairy tale to work with too, to kind of just let your imagination go and try to find tie-ins.
And it is biographical fiction in a way. No offense, readers, but if you didn't know, Charlotte Lucas and Anne de Berg aren't actually real people. I mean, we've made them out to be. But in a sense, I thought it allowed you to have kind of broad strokes, especially with Catherine, because she was able to represent so many women of that time period, that the only power a woman really has, and you do this with the Medici court, was to be able to establish a little corner of the world where, yes, it's still a man's world, but these two people can become puppets for entertainment. And one of the really cool things that I learned, when your deal points memo, everybody who's watching, Publishers Weekly and Publishers Lunch often let people know what's coming out, because they will release a little blurb saying, so-and-so agent has sold Molly Greeley to this William Morrow with this book, and it's a real life Beauty and the Beast based on the Pedro Gonzalez. Don't even bother. My Canadian doesn't work. Pedro Gonzalez. And I looked it up, and I really found, I went on my own rabbit hole in anticipation of this book, and I found all of the critiques and criticism and study of that one portrait that we have, that kind of just the fact that her hand is on his shoulder is like, and boom, it was a love story because she is touching him, and that's what Renaissance painting teaches us.
But that, I mean, I just found that so unbelievable. That, I mean, it just seemed like, first of all, you know, the fact that her hand was on his shoulder, it was like, they could have posed her that way. Second, the portrait very likely was not painted from life, from at least according to a couple of other sources that I had found. So it could entirely have been the painter's imagination and his you know, choice to make it look like she loved him. I mean, and as the writer, I chose to make it so that she loved him
because it's what we got Beauty and the Beast from, this one hand gesture.
It's really incredible that's yeah.
That's the basis for all of this. And if anyone has seen the film Up and that montage that everybody cries at, you're going to get a little bit of that in Marvelous, where there's the wonderful kind of looks at a relationship that has to grow out of something into different things as these people are tested, but who actually work towards intimacy and loving each other. And there's a really interesting scene of early intimacy between Pedro, he has two names depending on who's referring to him, and an unexpected ally, I don't want to give too much away, that plays a lasting part in our understanding of how rare human kindness is in his life. And how did you decide to perhaps cherry pick these little moments that lead him to be able to have a fulfilling relationship with Catherine? I think you know who I'm talking about.
I think I do.
That was just like, whoa.
I wanted him to have a friend. I knew that much. And I also very much wanted him to, I didn't want his entire life other than Catherine to be tragedy. And I wanted someone to love him for him, from the, like, just to, for whatever reason, to see him and think he was lovable. Whereas, you know, like you said, he and Catherine have to work toward that. But I wanted him to have someone who just simply loved him. And, but also not to have it be, I didn't want to go into, you know, a crazy love triangle, something that was going to, I wasn't interested in going there. But I thought, you know, his appearance was so unusual, but that doesn't mean that nobody was going to look at him and find him desirable or find him lovable. And I just really, really wanted to give him that.
And just sometimes you just need that moment to ground and find his humanity, because there are moments that it would be easy to default into Pedro is this, oh, poor Pedro, and we have to side with him all the time. There are moments and choices within the story where he's not going to be your favorite person. And I really felt that dimension was crucial to establishing that he is actually a human, that we see him as a human and not just this guy who looks different.
I'm really glad that worked, because that was what I was going for. Yeah, I very much didn't want him to be either fully pitiable. I didn't want you know, readers to only feel sorry for him. And I didn't want him to be, you know, that perfect character that, you know, the Mary Sue basically of, or for Catherine to be that way either. I wanted them both to make mistakes, or not to, you know, not to see each other clearly in the beginning too. But because I feel like that's what, marriage is in a large sense, is two imperfect people trying to, come together. And as much as I absolutely adore rom-com, oh goodness, sorry.
Well, that happens.
Stop. As much as I love rom-coms. I love, I love feel-good romances.
Yeah.
But I wanted this to be more of a realistic portrait of a marriage that might have, inspired a fairy tale.
And I think that for me, physical attraction in books is the most boring way of establishing connection. I just think it has to be something more. I don't like the insta love. And even though Catherine is traditionally beautiful, it takes Pedro a while to be able to really connect with her. And I did have to ask you, you fell down your rabbit holes. You had what was available to you, not just with Pedro and Catherine, but with the de Medici period, the wars. There's a lot of conflict that goes on here beyond their world. Was there one perfect resource you wish you had that you kept looking for and never found? I'm not saying the Pedro diaries, like that would be his, hey, and he kept a diary.
That would have been it. Without that, honestly, I think what I really would have liked is I had a hard time grounding myself in court life. There was a huge amount of information about the, how people fought each other, the infighting between the courtiers, the problems between the Protestants and the Catholics in France. There was a lot of that. There was a lot about the many kings and queens that passed through during Pedro's time at court. But even just very, very basic things like, what kind of rooms would people have had? What sort of servants would someone of Pedro's status have had? I was very, very spoiled when I was doing the Jane Austen books, because there is a huge amount of information on that period, and books that literally are titled things like, daily life in Regency England, and
Jane Austen's Bath, like,
yes, exactly,
the world of Georgette Heyer.
It was yes. So I read a lot of fiction that was set in that period. There's a lot on England in that period, but I had a harder time finding very practical information about France and Italy. Italy was easier actually, but France especially.
You actually challenge yourself and us, because you take us through tours. He literally gives her a tour, and you also find ways to present what roles women could have played in court if they're not Catherine and married off to the resident palace beast. The midwife, the servant that Catherine has, that really shows that even when Catherine is married off to a man that she has never met before, there are fates worse than marrying a stranger for a woman in that time period.
Yes, very much so. I think it was the impression that I have always gotten was that it was you had to be a very fortunate woman to have much agency at all in that time period, because everything was so stratified by class, and then women were bought and sold. I mean, it was simply that was if they were lucky, if they could be bought and sold to a good man. But like you said, Agnes, I almost said Antoinette, Agnes, her friend and, the servant, was another human marvel, basically, kind of like Pedro. And she had no agency whatsoever. It was, she very little agency. And yet she felt kind of fortunate because she wasn't starving as she wasn't a peasant starving. Like,
the bar was so low.
Yes, that's it exactly.
What I find interesting in this book is that there's only security for an instant moment in any parts of their lives, because the court changes and the favor could change at any moment. And Catherine tries to go home to her father's, and you can't go home. They
Yeah.
try to establish home, and they find out that this new patron is, they just think they find freedom, and it's another prison. And I found that so heartbreakingly real. Was there anything that, no, we'll skip that because I've got, man, I could talk to you forever. You strike parallels between Pedro and Catherine that familiarize their experiences to each other, as well as open the door to this period to the readers. One is that they both hang under the shadow of not having a mother or a maternal figure. Catherine's died. Pedro was, overtaken by the palace life. The other is that neither has agency or decision making. And it's very rare to see a male figure in this time period or in fiction that has no agency. Catherine, of course, on being a woman whose father's failed business forces her into marriage. Did the story just naturally offer these things, or did you make an intentional choice to highlight this parallel between them?
For the most part, it naturally offered them. The more I thought about, especially the agency with Pedro, it really did strike me that they were on, in some ways, more even footing than a lot of husbands and wives. And so I did want to lean into that, but it just seemed like a natural thing that would be the case. If he was, if he was at the mercy of whatever monarch was on the throne, he wouldn't be somebody who could go out and make his own fortune easily, especially, given his appearance. Who would take him? In that time period.
And I hate to say it, even now,
yeah,
it's quite a very visible affliction that he has.
Yeah, it really is. And obviously I think now there is more sensitivity to such things, but it still is, it would still be very difficult, I think. And so, it was definitely, the story just kind of, in that sense, wrote itself, where the more I wrote about the two of them, the more they just seemed like they were evenly matched in a lot of different ways, even though it wouldn't look like it from the outside.
And we get to grow with them. And there's so much in this story, even though you only had fragments to draw from. It's so rich. I wondered how you plotted or outlined what to include, what to say, oh, I've got to leave this on the cutting room floor. How did that work? Because there's really so much in both of their lives.
I am a terrible outliner.
Me too. Yay. My editor is going to be like, yeah, you are. You suck.
Oh my God. Honestly, I'm surprised because I remember reading the Mozart Code and thinking I could just plot the way she does.
Oh no, that took 3 years. Plot? What plot?
Well, that's how I work. I go, it's all for the character feels, and like, oh right, something has to happen in the story. So
yeah, and that's when my editor comes, that's when the collaboration comes through. My books come alive in substantive edits, because on my own it's just like, oh, this is pretty.
Yes. Yep. So yeah, as far as this book goes, there was, I honestly lost track of how many drafts I did, because I could not figure out the structure. Especially I kind of resisted putting in too much of the French history because I was more interested in their romance, in their family life, than I was in the wars between, the Protestants and the Catholics. And it was my agent who finally was like, you have to include some more of this, because it would have been there. You have to. And so I don't know. I don't even have an answer, because I have, as we're talking, I have these visions of my computer screen with like Marvelous Draft 1, Marvelous Draft 2, Marvelous Draft
Marvelous 1.2/A 7:50
Yep,
p.m. Where
that's
did that one
exactly
go?
it.
No,
Yeah.
I get it. And I think that one of the smart things you do is ensure that you give us not only the history of the time period, but the history of these people. I love the narrative technique you use in that Pedro is the one to tell Catherine his story after their first daughter is born.
Mhm.
It's almost like now that she's holding the baby and she's grounded for life and she has this other kind of Pedro type person in her arms, she really needs to know what. It's almost like, yes, I'm in love with you in this moment because yay, we have a baby, but also, okay, what am I getting myself into here as a mother? I
Yeah.
need to know this guy's story. And
Mhm.
he tells her, you are so smart, by the
Thank
way.
you.
I loved how you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, I want, and that was one thing that was important to me. I didn't want her to just hear it from other people, because anything she heard from anyone else was going to be this fiction that was kind of almost like a fairy tale in and of itself, that was told
Yeah.
about in the court. I mean, and I think that is something that was told about him, was this idea that he was the son of an indigenous king from the Canary Islands, which, I mean, is a possibility that he was an indigenous prince, but it's not a likelihood. It seems more likely that he was a regular person,
Yeah.
lived there. He might have been indigenous, but that he was not, royalty. And this would be, but the royals at the time, who collected unusual people and surrounded themselves with them, wanted the fantasy. Basically, they wanted to have a great story to tell the dignitaries who came from other countries, um, about the unusual people who were sitting around, surrounding their thrones while they were talking. And so I wanted Catherine to hear from Pedro's own mouth who he was. I mean, because until that moment, she didn't really know.
He didn't even have his own name. And it's so interesting for anyone who's reading this, they really do collect people.
Yeah.
And when Catherine and Pedro have children, and I don't want to give too much away, their children are property of, and I figured that there were moments that must have been very hard for you as a mom of young kids to be able to get into the mind space to write some of the stuff that you had to serve this story.
Yes, honestly, it was. There was one of their children in particular,
Yeah.
really, really affected me. And to the point that she actually was a narrator for a little while there.
Oh,
And then, yeah,
interesting.
and then that was one thing that got cut, because it just was a little over the top. Um, but yes, it was really, really hard to imagine really having, I mean, obviously any parent, you're not going to have control over your children's lives as they grow
No.
up. They're their lives, but this wasn't the same as that. This was other adults having control over your children.
This is my property that I am claiming because I had the great idea to hook you two up. And that it's just so interesting. And yet, as I said before, when it gets dark, it still gets beautiful. Your writing is just one long poem. It's absolutely, it's so good. It's so good, guys. You're just going to gobble this up. It makes you want to taste the words. This is exactly the kind of book that makes you fall in love with reading. And if you've read 18 zillion books, it makes you fall more in love with reading. And one of the things that you do to remind us of all of the beauty and wonder and marvel in the world is Pedro has a fascination with astronomy and the stars, and there's a link between the stars and the universe and him. How did that motif in the book come about?
Um, that was something that kind of occurred to me pretty far into it, that um just because I had been doing research about, he was this very learned man. He was, despite the fact
Yeah,
that he
he's
was,
smart.
yeah, because even though he was this human marvel, the king who he was given to as a present when he was a child decided to educate him, like as
Like,
if he
we
was
can teach the monkey how to read. Yeah.
that's exactly what I think it was. And so, but he learned, and so he was apparently, very, very intelligent and knew a lot. And one of the things that fascinated people at this time period was astronomy. So it kind of made sense to me that he would be very interested in that, partly also because the stories, that are told in the stars are, um, they're larger than life in the same way that his, story was kind of larger than life. And it just felt like something that he would relate to.
I loved it. I loved it so much. And I want to make sure we get to some audience questions. So one of the things that I always ask authors is there anything that you've been reading lately that you love or want to tell us you need to read this? It couldn't be something lately. It could be anything. What should we know from Molly's bookshelf?
Lately, actually, one of the things that I've read that I loved very much was Jane and Edward, which was a recommendation that I got from you.
I just interviewed her on her launch day, Torontonian author.
Oh my
Isn't
gosh.
it great?
It was exactly what I needed. It's so for anyone who hasn't heard of it or read it, it is a modern day retelling of Jane Eyre, and I love Jane Eyre, and this was such a smart retelling and so sweet, and so
it was such a good retell. It was the retelling to kind of, you have to do Jane Eyre, you got to strike a balance. And it's set in a law firm in Toronto, and of course she's become a friend of mine, Melody Edwards, and we just did her launch a few weeks ago here in the city. And one of the things she talked about was how she had to establish in a world of post Me Too, how that relationship, which was also romantic to us in the Victorian period with this manipulative guy who has a wife in the act, how do you transpose that? You are going to love that her next one is a modern day persuasion set in a winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake, not too far from here. So
yes, I am.
I'm so glad you loved that one. Let's be friends.
Oh my gosh. Yes. No, it was so good. So that was really fun. And it was one of those things where I needed something smart and fun to read. And it was the perfect recommendation. And I have also been reading a lot with my kids because we're doing our final year of homeschooling right now. And so my daughter is 11, and we actually today just finished reading a book called The Night Diary, which is about partition in 1947 between India and Pakistan. And
oh wow.
It's told in this little girl's diary entries, this 12-year-old's diary entries, and it is. I was sitting there with tears in my eyes today, and I was like, my daughter was reading because we go back and forth reading to each other, and she was reading, and I was sitting there like this, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? So it is a beautiful book. So if anyone has a middle grade reader, it's so good. Yeah.
And Julie, I think we can bring you back on. Hi, Julie.
I'm back. Oh my God, such a great conversation. I absolutely just. Oh, there was, like you said, Rachel, there's so much more that we could just like dive into on this. I mean, there's just, and I am fascinated. I was so fascinated by the, that there was so little and what you created. Just,
it's a work of art. And I don't say that about every book. I love a million books, but this one is a work of art. It really is.
It really is. So, so one of the questions that I had, because it's one of the first things you read, it's the first part of the story, it's the introduction into it, was that and I won't give it away because it's a really good start to a book. Was that always the intro into the story?
It was not. Originally, I started with Pedro as a child. That was going to be very, very, very beginning. And then I think I needed in my own head to see the couple without giving. Well, I guess do you mind if I give it away?
Yeah, no, I just didn't want to be the spoiler. So if you're not into, if you would like do some la la la. You don't want to.
Because it starts at the end of their marriage, and so I think I needed, because I was writing so much of it, and at the point that I was writing, they still had not come together and come to understand one another, and I needed to see that they were going to. And so I wrote the scene, and I didn't know where it was going to go yet. I didn't know yet what the structure of the book was going to be, but I absolutely needed to see that they were going to end up loving each other.
Yeah, and it
works, and there's still so much to explore that it doesn't really give anything away.
It really doesn't, but it is one of those just beautiful scenes. It is just one of those that is just like, and it does sort of, as the reader, it does help you also set up the, that this is where this is going and what's, it's just, so I think this is somebody on here that you might know, has a question for you. Chris Walter.
Oh,
Oh, hi, Chris. She made it. I know she was gonna try, but she also has kids at home, and
so Chris is on here with us. So hi, Chris. So she wanted to hear more. She also made some comments in about, that you do everything with heart, which you do. But she'd like to know more about your intuitive writing process since you don't outline.
Whew. I don't know if I'd call it intuitive. I'd call it a big mess most of the time. A large portion of it magically comes together. I tend to, I really tend to just write very short scenes at the beginning of from different characters' perspectives, or if I know that there's only one character, just different scenes from different parts of the book that I have ideas for, until something really clicks, that feels like the character's voice, and that feels, I guess, just authentic to who I want them, who I imagine them to be. And so, like, one such scene in this was, again, Pedro's childhood, the very beginning, where it talks about him thinking he was playing with other little boys when he was small. That was what it was like. I think I wrote that. It was one of those things that came to me just as I was about to fall asleep, and I had this idea, and I had been struggling to try to figure out exactly who Pedro was and what his backstory was. And I just started writing, and it was, maybe a page that just kind of came out of me. So when that kind of magic happens, it's wonderful. The rest of it is kind of a slow, torturous process. But
and when you were writing, because you're writing about another, like when somebody is another, did you really even comprehend how that was going to impact readers and that whole topic of being another, and because it's a big, and just what it means today?
Yes, that was something that I struggled with. It was, there's a lot around own voices and around, am I the right person to tell a story about somebody with hypertrichosis when I don't have that myself? And I'm very lucky in that my best friend was able to be a sensitivity reader for it. She was born with a facial difference, and so getting her input on her experience was very helpful to me, even though it was a different difference than Pedro's, but it's still something that has impacted her life. And so I felt a little better feeling like I at least had someone's perspective, who was being honest with me and open about what it was like to grow up looking different from other people.
Because it's so important to have those stories told too.
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of the kids' book. Oh God, and it was such a big kids' book.
Oh, The Wonder.
Yes.
Yeah.
It sort of reminded me of that in a way too, where it's, there, you have to have those, and what it means and how you can, you just did a beautiful job. I'm tongue tying myself here, but because that's a part of it too, that is such an important part of this book. Okay, and so now we're going to get a question from Christine, because we're going back. Sometimes when the questions come in, it's when the conversation's rolling. So this is going to take us back to when y'all were talking about Jane Austen. So she'd like to know what is your relationship with Pride and Prejudice?
Oh, that's a good question. My relationship with Pride and Prejudice goes back to the BBC miniseries.
That's right.
I watched when I was 10 years old. My mom.
The VHS series.
Yes,
I still have that set. Yeah.
I had that. And I remember I actually had a friend over, and my mother just turned this show on, and my friend wanted to go play. And I was like, no, I have to watch this. I don't know what this is, but I have to watch this. And then I decided I had to read the book, and then I had to read everything else Jane Austen had written. And so, I've read and reread Jane Austen's novels, and definitely appreciated them differently as I got older than when I was 10. But they, I think for me, as much as I love the central romances, it has always been her side characters that kind of fascinated me, because she's just amazing at the way that she would have this really dynamic cast of characters with really interesting, quirky, just these quirky people. But she would just give you like hints as to who they were. And I always, like Charlotte Lucas, I always wondered about, who she was on the inside. And then obviously Anne de Berg, who I wrote about in The Heiress, because she doesn't even speak in Pride and Prejudice, and yet I always wondered about her because she's sickly, and her mother is this overbearing person. And I remember as a teenager rereading Pride and Prejudice and thinking, oh my gosh, that poor girl. Like, what would that be like?
Isn't it amazing that we are like, that her writing still resonates so strongly to generation after generation after generation? It's incredible.
We're still mining it.
Yeah. Oh, and I wonder if we always will be, because she has so many kind of fundamental truths about what it means to be human, I think, in her books, and about how relationships work, and how imperfect people can still be, worthwhile and worthy.
Okay, so is it which Darcy are we loving?
Colin Firth. There's only one.
Yeah.
He's played it in different centuries.
Yes,
had to play it in two different centuries.
I don't know. It had to be. I can't think of the other actor's name. I think that
Matthew McFadden.
Yes.
I mean, I'm nothing against him, but I feel like that wasn't Darcy. That was
No, he belongs in Little Dorrit. I'm a Dickens girl, so he belongs in, he's great in Little Dorrit, but I'm with you on, it's Colin.
It's all okay. There you go. I love it. Although now that he's in Succession, you can't even watch him in it anymore. It's like he's totally different. It's like, okay, who is that? Who is that? All right, we're running up on our hour. So I know that you just finished this, and Rachel asked you about what you're reading, but what are you working on next?
Yeah, Molly, what are you writing? Other than the annoying text that I send you, like, do this.
Well, one of those things that you sent me, I might be working on right now. And
sorry, guys, I just
you
sometimes
definitely
have an idea. I'm a literary agent by day, and so that's what I do. I'm just like, this story, this person.
Yeah,
that's the one that has kind of clicked with me right now. It's, which I don't want to go into.
Don't give anything away.
Started it, but I couldn't not once the idea was in my head. And then, but I also had started a book set in medieval Germany that is another kind of fairy tale spin-off, which I'm maybe halfway through at this point. So,
ooh, that sounds intriguing too. I love that.
So
and
excited.
Rachel, you have some things going on.
Oh, for
lady.
the love of Pete. Yeah,
I know.
So I have The Castle Keepers coming out on May the something, I think the 6th. Sorry, guys, it's been a long day. May the 6th. And that is a collaborative novel with Amy Runyon and Janelle Sozelski, both friends of Warwick's. And it's a castle.
Why is there nothing on my calendar about that?
We got to do that. And
yeah.
It's a castle in Northumberland and a family curse and a poison garden across 3 wars, the Boer War, the Great War, and my part is just post World War II, when the castle has been turned into a hospital for convalescent soldiers. So I've got that coming out in May. And December the 5th, Operation Scarlet comes out, and it is my homage to the Scarlet Pimpernel, which is one of my favorite stories, except it's the Scarlet Pimpernel told in occupied World War II France. And it was one of those, how has nobody done this yet? So I did it. I'm also working on a biography of Sir Christopher Wren for Pen and Sword in the UK. I wrote a book called The London Restoration, which is my homage to the Christopher Wren churches rebuilt after World War II. And an editor in the UK read that and was like, wow, you're obsessed with Christopher Wren. Let's get you on this project. So the research trips for that have been fun. I've signed on with HarperCollins for some more historicals, and I am not allowed to talk publicly about one of them yet, but I can tell you that when I fell across this story, just like Molly, I was like, oh, I need to do that. And I can tell you that I just did a 3-week trip to Austria to research it. So that will be coming out in 2024. And there's a million other books coming out.
I
and-
know you just, like I said, I was not lying in my intro when I said she's got lots of things going on.
So please just buy my books, everybody.
Yeah. Well, we definitely want to get something on the calendar here for the
Yeah,
collaboration. So
Catholic- yes.
email me
It's gonna
about
be
that.
so good.
Yeah, that is going to be amazing. So, Molly, it was so great meeting you.
I'm such a fan, Molly.
It was so good to finally meet you. I mean, to be able to talk.
Meet your stalker in real life.
Well, we love the stalking that Rachel does because she brings us wonderful
It's
authors
harmless.
for this. Harmless stalking. Harmless stalking. Continued success with this. It is. Oh, I know what. Is there any kind of movie, any kind of things going on with that you can share? Because I can't even imagine.
I mean,
this
that would be lovely.
Oh, someone has to option.
Somebody has to option this.
Yeah,
Come on.
I completely agree. I think that would be the perfect thing.
Oh, this amazing. So we'll put that out into the universe.
We'll manifest that.
We'll manifest it. Rachel, you're pretty good at manifesting things. So we're going to do that. Ladies, thank you again so much. It was wonderful.
Thanks, Julie.
We'll see you
Thanks,
the next
Warwicks.
time. Okay.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye.